$10,000 per XRP. That is the number people are starting to say out loud, not in whispers, not in memes, in actual conversations about what XRP could reach if certain conditions play out. And most of this community has two reactions to it: either instant excitement, this is the one that's going to change my life, or instant dismissal, mathematically impossible, pure fantasy. Both reactions are wrong, because the question isn't whether $10,000 is possible. The question is what specific conditions would need to exist for that number to make mathematical sense. How many of those conditions are already in motion? Which ones are realistic within documented timeframes? And which ones would require a fundamental restructuring of the global financial system that may or may not happen? Today, I'm going to give you the honest mathematical breakdown, not hype, not dismissal. The actual arithmetic of what $10,000 would require, what the more realistic scenarios look like, why the velocity argument that supporters use is partially correct but often misapplied, and what price targets emerge when you run the math with honest assumptions instead of optimistic ones. Because after this video, when someone says XRP to $10,000, you'll know exactly what that claim requires, what probability to assign it, and what the more likely outcomes look like in comparison. This is not financial advice. I am sharing publicly available information for educational purposes. Always do your own research. Before we get into it, drop 10K if you believe the extreme targets are achievable within a 10-20 year horizon. Drop realistic if you want the honest math with honest assumptions. Drop never if you think any 4-digit price is impossible regardless of time frame. I want the full range because the conversation we're about to have only works if we're honest with each other about what we actually believe. Welcome back. I am the calm analyst. Around here, we don't sell fantasy and we don't dismiss possibility. We run the math. Today, we're breaking down the $10,000 XRP scenario through the lens of market cap arithmetic, velocity theory, free float compression, adoption curves, and the documented analyst targets that bracket the realistic ranges. Let's get into it. Let me start with the basic math, because most of the people screaming $10,000 and most of the people dismissing it have never actually run the numbers. XRP has approximately 61 billion circulating supply currently, with 100 billion total supply once all escrow releases complete. At $10,000 per token against circulating supply, the market cap would be 610 trillion. Against total supply, $1 quadrillion does. For context, the total global wealth, every asset, every stock, every bond, every piece of real estate, every private business, every commodity, every currency in existence, is estimated at approximately $500 trillion. So a $10,000 XRP price would imply a market cap larger than all global wealth combined. At that level, it is not mathematically possible within traditional market cap frameworks. That's the dismissal case. And it's correct if you're applying traditional market cap logic. But here's where the argument gets more interesting. XRP's supporters have a specific response to the market cap dismissal, and it's grounded in a real economic concept called velocity. So let me give it the honest treatment it deserves. Velocity of money measures how fast a unit of currency moves through an economy. The faster it moves, the less total supply is needed to support a given volume of transactions. If one XRP token can settle a $10 transaction today, then that same token can settle 100 such transactions over a month, representing $1,000 in total transaction volume. The token's role in facilitating economic activity is much larger than its market cap implies. The Bank for International Settlements has published research on bridge assets in efficient payment corridors. They estimate that in highly efficient corridors, a bridge asset can turn over 8 to 10 times per day. That means each unit of the bridge asset facilitates 8 to 10 times its face value in daily settlement volume. If XRP becomes the global bridge asset for international payments, and if it handles even a fraction of the $1.6 trillion in daily global cross-border flows through the BIS velocity model, the implied price floor based on liquidity requirements is a real number, not a hype number. A calculated number based on how much bridge liquidity the corridors would need to function. Velocity models produced by institutional analysts have run different scenarios. At $1 trillion in daily XRP-mediated settlement with standard BIS velocity, the implied price floor is approximately $1,000. At full integration into cross-border flows plus tokenized asset settlement plus AI agent transactions, models have produced price floors in the $1,000 to $5,000 range as mathematical outputs, not hype projections. If that distinction between hype and model-based output just clicked, smash that like button. Because understanding the velocity argument properly separates the calm investor from both the dismissive critic and the blind optimist. Now, let me be brutally honest about what $10,000 would require. Because the velocity argument has real substance, but it also has limits that most supporters don't acknowledge. For XRP to reach $10,000 per token, the asset would need to function as the dominant bridge currency for essentially all global cross-border settlement. Not a portion, not a corridor, essentially all of it. Plus significant portions of the tokenized asset market, plus the AI agent economy, plus partial reserve adoption by central banks. That combination represents XRP capturing perhaps 30 to 50% of all global financial settlement infrastructure over a multi-decade horizon. It is not impossible, but it would require outcomes that no analyst, no institutional model, and no commercial projection currently builds into their targets. Standard Chartered's most aggressive public target is $28 by 2030. That's from Jeffrey Kendrick, who runs digital asset research at one of the world's largest banks, and whose $100,000 Bitcoin calls were correct when being right required conviction. His $28 XRP target represents a scenario where XRP achieves significant institutional adoption and settlement roll capture. From $28, reaching $10,000 requires another 357x. That means Standard Chartered's bull case is approximately 0.28% of the $10,000 target. Even the most aggressive credentialed institutional projection assumes XRP reaches less than 1/300th of the $10,000 level. This is the honest context. $10,000 is not mathematically impossible at the furthest extreme of adoption scenarios, but it is multiple orders of magnitude above every current credentialed projection, and the scenarios where it becomes reachable require outcomes that most analysts consider either speculative or dependent on fundamental restructuring of the global financial system. Comment below. Now that you've seen the honest comparison, Standard Chartered's $28 versus the $10,000 target, how do you calibrate your expectations? Type standard if you think institutional projections are most realistic. Type aggressive if you think velocity models justify higher targets. Type extreme if you believe the full restructuring scenario eventually materializes. I want the honest distribution of this community's actual beliefs. Now let me walk you through the more realistic price ladder, because this is what matters for positioning today, not the extreme endpoint. At $2.80, Standard Chartered's base case for 2026, XRP would be at roughly double current price. Achievable if the Clarity Act passes and ETF inflows resume at the January pace. This is the conservative institutional floor with legislation passing. At $5, the mid-range scenario supported by multiple analysts, XRP would be roughly 3.5x from current. Requires Clarity Act passage plus institutional adoption accelerating through the second half of 2026, plus Bitcoin cycle top drawing altcoin rotation. At $8, Standard Chartered's bull case, XRP would be approximately 5.5x from current. Requires Clarity Act plus resumption of ETF inflows at record pace plus favorable macro conditions. At $12, the aggressive commercial adoption target, XRP would be approximately 8x from current. Requires significant cross-border payment corridor capture plus institutional mandate updates plus tokenization settlement adoption beginning. At $28, Standard Chartered's 2030 target, XRP would be approximately 20x from current. Requires multi-year execution of the institutional adoption thesis, including significant tokenized asset settlement market share. At $50, the scenario that assumes full CBDC interoperability adoption, plus AI agent economy scale, plus significant reserve allocation from at least one major central bank, approximately 35x from current, grounded in the most aggressive documented velocity models. At $100, the scenario where the tokenization wave reaches projected BCG scale of 16 trillion and XRP captures substantial settlement market share, approximately 70x from current, supported by specific velocity models but not currently in any institutional price target. At $500, we exit the range of any credentialed current analyst projection entirely. This level would require XRP to become the dominant global bridge asset with central bank reserve allocation. At $1,000 and above, we enter the theoretical maximum from extreme velocity models applied to essentially complete global settlement dominance. These are possibility scenarios, not projection scenarios. $10,000 sits well beyond even the theoretical ceiling of any current model. Reaching it would require assumptions that no analyst currently incorporates and that most would classify as requiring fundamental restructuring of global finance that may or may not occur. Now, let me address the adoption timeline, because time is the variable that most price discussions ignore, and it's the single most important factor for calibrating expectations. The Clarity Act timeline is days to weeks. Markup in April 2026, potential passage in May or July. The Post-Clarity Act institutional flow timeline is 6 to 12 months. Wealth management distribution, pension fund mandate updates, sovereign wealth fund evaluations, all operating on quarterly or annual cycles. The tokenization wave timeline is 3 to 7 years. BCG projects $16 trillion by 2030. Current tokenized asset market is approximately $20 billion. The gap represents the adoption curve. The CBDC deployment timeline is 5 to 10 years. Pilots are active now. Full national deployments are targeting 2028 to 2035 depending on country. The central bank reserve adoption timeline is 10 to 20 years. Central banks change reserve composition on multi-decade cycles. Even favorable conditions produce gradual allocation changes. The full AI agent economy transformation is 10 to 25 years. Current deployments are embryonic. Full scale, where autonomous transactions dominate, would require AI capabilities and institutional adoption that develop over multiple technology generations. So when someone says $10,000 XRP, the honest question is what timeline? By 2027, mathematically impossible given current market structure. By 2030, would require execution of every possible catalyst at maximum pace, which has never happened in any asset. By 2040, more plausible if the full institutional, reserve, and AI agent adoption scenarios all materialize. By 2050 or beyond, within range of theoretical models but dependent on outcomes that compound over generations. The timeframe people assume when they throw out $10,000 targets matters enormously. A $10,000 target by 2027 is hype. A $10,000 target by 2045 is a multi-decade thesis about global financial infrastructure restructuring with real components. Subscribe right now, hit the bell, drop A in the comments, because the calm analyst's job is calibrating expectations to timelines so you don't sell too early on realistic progress and don't hold forever waiting for unrealistic endpoints. Now let me give you the positioning framework, because the strategic question isn't whether $10,000 happens. It's how to position today, given the full range of possible outcomes. If your base case is $2.80 to $5 within 2026, a position today of 1,000 XRP at 1.42 costs approximately $1,420 and returns $2,800 to $5,000. A 2x to 3.5x return in roughly 12 months. That's a strong return by any measure and requires no extreme scenarios to materialize. If your base case extends to $28 by 2030, the same position returns $28,000 on the original $1,420 investment, approximately 20xx over 4 years. An outstanding return that requires Standard Chartered's published institutional analysis to prove correct. If your base case extends to $100 within a decade, the same position returns $100,000. A 70x return that requires the tokenization wave to reach projected scale. Plausible but dependent on outcomes that no one can guarantee. Beyond that, you're in territory where the possibility exists, but the probability is uncertain. $1,000 XRP in a 20-year horizon is not dismissible, but it's also not projectable. The calm approach is to position for the outcomes that published institutional analysis supports, the $2.80 to $28 range over 2026 to 2030, while holding through with awareness that higher scenarios exist without staking your psychological commitment to them. If Standard Chartered is right, you make 2 to 20x on current positions. If the bolder scenarios play out, the returns compound from there. If the extreme scenarios eventually materialize, the position holds value through it all. The mistake is using $10,000 as your anchor and measuring progress against it. Because when XRP hits $5 in 2026, the $10,000 anchor holders will complain that the move is insufficient, fail to take any profits, and potentially watch a massive return evaporate during normal market cycles because they were measuring against a number that was never the realistic endpoint. The calm investor anchors to realistic targets and treats higher scenarios as optional upside, not expected outcome. That framework lets you capture the realistic gains with discipline while maintaining exposure to the theoretical ceiling if the multi-decade thesis plays out. Let me leave you with this. $10,000 per XRP is not impossible in the multi-decade theoretical extreme. It is dramatically above every current credentialed institutional projection. It requires outcomes that compound over generations rather than quarters. What is achievable within documented timeframes is 2 to 20x from current prices based on Standard Chartered's published targets, up to 70x if the tokenization wave reaches BCG's projected scale. Possibly higher in multi-decade scenarios that no analyst currently models but that aren't mathematically excluded. The honest answer to can XRP reach $10,000 is possibly in extreme scenarios over generational timeframes, dependent on outcomes that no one can guarantee. The more useful answer to what should you expect is institutional projections cluster in the 280 to 28 odd range over the next 4 years. And those returns, if they materialize, are transformational without requiring anything close to $10,000. Don't chase the extreme target and miss the realistic one. The realistic one is plenty, and the position that captures it is the same position that holds theoretical optionality on everything above it. Price is a distraction, value is the reality, structure is what matters, and the structure that supports realistic multi-decade wealth creation in XRP does not depend on $10,000 materializing. It depends on the institutional adoption thesis playing out at the documented pace that analyst projections already support. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. Remember, haste leads to loss, while calm analysis leads to victory. Comment calm analyst below, and be honest with yourself in the comments. What's your actual target? The one you're positioned for, not the one you fantasize about, because those two numbers should be close together, not 100x apart. And the calm investor is the one who knows the difference. Like, subscribe, notifications on. I'll see you in the next one. Stay patient, stay rational, and as we always do, we don't wait for the future. We plan for it. Peace.